should I save or should I pay off debt? I would say do both. I would always say be paying off some debt, be at least putting money in an emergency fund as far as savings at a minimum, because what you don't want is to pay off debt. Then every emergency, whether it's a flat tire or, a house leak or whatever, is going right back on the credit card. That kind of makes no sense. It's really working against yourself. So if you can do each simultaneously so that when those emergencies come up, you're not going back into debt. You're taking it out of your emergency fund that you're building at the same time. Your relationship with money matters. I'm Michelle Perkins, and this is the Money and You podcast, where I will be breaking down your relationship with money, offering tough love money tips, and a money dating plan that will focus on lifting the barriers to success to help pave the way for better money practices and increased wealth. It's time to take control to live a limit-free life. It starts today. Hello. Welcome to the Money and You Show. I'm Michelle Perkins, your host, and I'm going to do a quick solo show today. I wanted to address something, namely the questions that you have around money. And one of the most interesting things I think about questions are that we get self-conscious about having them, which makes no sense. And we've all heard, every teacher in our life say, there are no stupid questions, ask anything you want. But for some reason, we all feel that our questions might be, silly. It might be something everybody knows, so it's going to bore everybody to death when they ask it and get answers. I think it's really interesting that people have to remind us that questions are okay. And one of the things that happens with money is we have a lot of questions. And we have questions, we don't know the answers, we are uncomfortable asking the questions, and so we just kind of forget about it and move on. And that's a lot of how we stay ignorant and maybe, unproductive in the land of finance. And so I just thought it'd be fun to kind of research what are people's questions out there. I know the questions people ask me, and I'm going to tell you a few of those in just a minute, the most frequent questions that I receive. And then I'm going to tell you a couple of nuances about questions, actually more about the answers to questions that is pretty revealing. And then I just Googled for a minute, and I found on thestreet.com some interesting little tidbits about questions that people have around money. So what do you think the most asked question around finances or money is? I wouldn't have guessed this one. But according to thestreet.com, it is, how do I invest in cryptocurrency? That is typed into the Google search bar on an average of 150,400 times a month. So that is only people searching in English. So while it's global, it's just English speakers. So that's a lot. That's a lot of people interested in cryptocurrency, which I thought was interesting. Let's see. What are some other ones? How much should I invest when I start, and how can I start investing? Those were number 2 and 3, with a respective 137,000 people asking. So also a big interest out there in investing, and more importantly, a lack of knowledge and education and understanding about how to invest. So these are really great questions, not to only Google, but to learn more about. So next 2 questions, a little more subjective. What should I be investing in right now? Pretty tough one, I think, for Google to answer. And what is passive investing? That was almost 50,000 people asking. The other was almost 60. So these are clearly interesting topics that are on people's minds. And then finally, what do we have here? How is return on investment calculated? How can I trade safely? And what are investment bonds? Those kind of rounded out the list of most asked questions, top 10. So, their pat obvious answer was talk to a professional about all of these. But it is interesting that money is on people's minds. People are asking these questions. And the world is also interesting because these are not easy questions to answer. So you could go down a lot of avenues, which I think is why you do want to talk to professionals about this, but you can get many, many answers on these questions. So it's almost overwhelming, the information that's out there on these. So what do you do with that? Where do you go? I mean, the answers are so broad and varied. So something to actually, before you make any moves, and I think people ask the questions with the intention partly to learn, partly to take an action. And I would say take no action until you get a lot more education on these. I can't tell you how many people I know who, based on the advice of friends or just watching other friends do well, took everything they had and put it in cryptocurrency several years ago. Hasn't worked out all that well. And when I think about it, I think about all the people who were jumping into that with so little understanding. I didn't have an understanding of it. So when I don't understand something, I can have all the people in the world telling me I should do it, but I need to at least have a decent grasp. I don't have to know it backwards and forwards. I don't have to be an expert, but I couldn't really wrap my brain around it. I would read about it. I'd read about blockchain and all of these things. And I just had such limited understanding of it that I just pretty much stayed away. That could have, been a bad move. But at the time, I felt like that's the way I wanted to go. So I do believe in educating yourself enough so that you're not just following the pack, you are actually understanding why you would follow the pack. So those are some interesting questions that the people out in the world are asking. The questions I get a lot, which I do enjoy answering, are things like, how do I budget? Which is an interesting one. And I think with all of these questions, what I want to say in this podcast more than anything is there is no right answer, no right one answer. There are so many ways to go, and everything that you hear has to be taken with you in mind, with you in consideration. So your lifestyle, your personality, how you roll, how much attention to detail you would pay to something, just everything about yourself. You have to have this really strong awareness of yourself before you dive in and take someone's advice for how to do something. There are so many ways to budget. I mean, ultimately, budget, it implies a level of frugality. It implies cutting back, reducing things. It implies really a scarcity mindset. I say you try to have budgeting be the opposite. Budgeting to lead to abundance, and starting with a level of abundance of, what do I have? How much am I earning? What is on the plus side here of what is coming into my world that I can then look at and analyze against what it costs to be me? That's basically what you're doing with the budget. You're figuring out how much does it cost to be you, to run your life, to pay for where you live, for what you drive, for how much you eat, all of those things, for the entertainment you like. How much does it cost to be you? And then it's just a knowing. It isn't a cutback situation. It's a knowing situation. So I know how much it costs to be me now. I know how much is coming in. And so there's a difference there, obviously. And I want to work with that. I either want that difference to be, less or more. So none of this is an automatic, like you need to start cutting back. It's really, a budget to me is a tracking device. It's something to look at. It's an understanding. The part that you can decide about is whether you do want to cut back and where and how much. That's all up to you to decide. So it's not automatically a negative. It should be a positive. I like all of this to be a positive. So that's a question. And again, there are so many ways to do this. I can't answer that right now, but there are ways to budget that are that take more time, that go into more detail. There are ways to budget that are less, time consuming. Not everybody wants to budget to the penny, and that's okay, depending on your particular circumstance. So many, many ways to budget, many ways to set it up, many ways to create the mechanics for it. So anyway, it can actually be a creative, fun process to figure out how to track your expenses, how much it's costing you to be you. Another question that comes a lot, what are the best ways to manage debt? Should I pay that off first and then save? This is a confusing point for people. Again, I'm not actually going to answer these questions. I can do those on other days, and they've come up in other shows. But the idea here is, well, I'll give a quick answer to this. Should I save or should I pay off debt? I would say do both. I would always say be paying off some debt, be at least putting money in an emergency fund as far as savings at a minimum, because what you don't want is to pay off debt. Then every emergency, whether it's a flat tire or, a house leak or whatever, is going right back on the credit card. That kind of makes no sense. It's really working against yourself. So if you can do each simultaneously so that when those emergencies come up, you're not going back into debt. You're taking it out of your emergency fund that you're building at the same time. Again, it always comes up, but it's not possible for everybody at every time to be able to do this. But when it is possible, that's what is best if you can. How to manage a line of credit. This comes up a lot. Many people have businesses with a line of credit, and they find themselves putting all of their money into paying off their line of credit so they can, because it's oftentimes a higher interest rate, and oftentimes they want to keep using it, so they don't want to have it always maxed out. That becomes a very interesting question. Another question that I hear a lot, how do I handle the ups and downs of cash flow? And that is a very, very tricky thing to navigate, especially if you're a business owner. You may not have consistent revenue. You may not even have consistent expenses beyond a baseline. So that's a really great question that people have that takes a bit, again, to work through. And most of this, almost all of these questions can be answered more easily. Well, all of them, not almost all. All of them can be answered more easily when you have all the information. So if you're thinking about savings and debt, there's more information for you to research and understand before you even want to delve into that. Same with the cash flow issue, same with all the issues. What I've really noticed people come to me with, they're not generic questions like, when should I start investing? Like we just talked about, that people are Googling. What they are decisions. They're almost always, I'm at a decision point. My job isn't working out for me, and I want to move, but it's going to cost me this. And, it's an unknown on the other side. So typically the questions are, they're always decision points. How do I make a decision around money? I'd have to give up something here to possibly get something there, and I don't know what to do. These are the main questions. Should I buy or lease a car, for a very simplistic one? Most money questions have to do with you needing to make a decision. And there's a financial component to that. And that's what's tricky. That's what's hard to navigate, especially if you don't have much financial understanding and knowledge to begin with. So that's where building up this little bit of financial education, knowing how much it costs to be you, knowing, what's in your savings and what your debt is all about, how much do you owe, all kinds of questions. When you come to these decision points, you have all the material that you need to make a decision. So I think that's where, instead of it being a question so much, it's usually something to analyze. It's a choice that you're trying to analyze. It's always complex. There are always multiple answers. And I'm going to get into how to make a decision, but what I really want people to know is however you analyze it, whatever effort you put into it, things can happen. So there's not going to be, again, a perfect answer necessarily. Maybe sometimes on a rare occasion there is, but typically not. So you're going to have to learn. And I think that's a hard thing with people and finances, to get comfortable knowing that there are no guarantees. So, and that goes certainly for investments and really for everything else. So, we have to be able to make the best, most well-educated decision about the choices we have, knowing that maybe 3 years from now, we'll think, oh my gosh, I could have done it this way and I'd have more money. this always comes up a lot. I mean, half of us spend a lot of time thinking about the real estate we never bought that is now so much more valuable. So it's important to get comfortable with that. That happens with money. Over time, you learn more, you see more, you realize the risks you weren't willing to take would have paid off, or vice versa. And so I think a big part of being comfortable with finance is being comfortable partly with taking risks, but partly with just accepting that we can't know everything enough to make the perfect choice every time when we're trying to make these decisions, even when we analyze them. But you should analyze it because that's going to help you. So Morningstar came up with a few ways to help you make these decisions. And I'm just going to run through these very quickly. So assess your financial reality. There's nothing wrong with dreaming big, but when it comes to planning your personal finances, you do want to bring a little dash of reality into them. Identify your goals and estimate costs. A little bit of what we were talking about, but remember to look at your goals, long-term and short-term. Sometimes we need to do things for the long-term. Short-term goals are usually within 5 or fewer years. Intermediate goals, 5 to 15, and long-term goals, 15 years or more in the future. We're talking about retirement, things like that. How will your decision affect those things? Don't forget your debt and your emergency fund, like we talked about. Tip 4, prioritize your goals. You really need to know which goals you want to focus on more. Are you more into retirement savings or college savings? I know what the financial people say, but again, it's up to you. And tip 5, have a plan. This is where people really go wrong, is they don't have enough of a financial plan, so they don't have a roadmap, and then they can make decisions that maybe aren't in alignment with their plan, and that will derail them and create some problems. So I think that is our show today. Just leave you with the idea that you will have questions, and it's really important to get answers. Everybody has questions, and everybody is learning, and so jump in there and learn with them. If you like this show, please follow the Money and You Show on all the podcast platforms, and you can find us on the Limit Free Life YouTube channel. And I would love it if you would go to limitfreelife.com, subscribe to my newsletter, and you'll get some show summaries, and you'll also get some other great financial tips on a regular basis. Thanks so much. See you next week.